I have a little book somewhere in the house called the Pastor's Unauthorized Instruction Book. And it gives little fortune cookie pieces of advice for pastors along the way. And one of the things I remember it said in there was never hire someone to be a youth pastor just because they look young. Sometimes we think if the person is a pastor but they look really young, they're going to relate to the youth just because they look really young. Therefore, let's hire them. And that doesn't always work out. You know, the way someone looks on the outside doesn't tell you what they're going to be like on the inside. And that's what Israel is going to realize as Saul is about to become king over the country in 1 Samuel chapter 9 and 1 Samuel chapter 10. They're judging him by how he looks on the outside. He's this big, brawny, beefy, buff person who's going to go out and kill the bad guys and be the king we want to be. And they're basing all that based on what he looks like. Let's find out what happens. 1 Samuel chapter 9. There was a Benjamite, a man of standing, whose name was Kish, son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath. The fact that there's anybody in Benjamin who is a man of standing after the horrible civil war that they fought with Israel and the terrible things they did to that man's concubine by raping her in Judges chapter 19. I mean, that right there is kind of astonishing that there's a man of standing at all. But there is. And Kish had a son named Saul. Now it's interesting. Kish is a man of standing. But what does it say about Saul? As handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. There's your hint right there, that Kish is a person of standing and reputation for who he is. But Saul is more known for what he looks like than for who he is. This is a narrative hint that Saul is all appearance rather than character. Verse 3, now the donkeys belonging to Saul's father Kish were lost. And Kish said to his son Saul, take one of the servants with you and go and look for the donkeys. So he passed through the hill country of Ephraim and Shalisha, but they didn't find them. They went into the district of Shalim, but the donkeys were not there. Then he passed through the territory of Benjamin, but they did not find them. So he's on a wild donkey chase. When they reached the district of Ziph, Saul said to the servant who was with him, come, let's go back, or my father will stop thinking about the donkeys and start worrying about us. But the servant replied, look, in this town there's a man of God. He's highly respected, and everything he says comes true. Let's go there now. Perhaps he will tell us what way to take. There is another hint that Saul is not the most spiritually sensitive person in the world. Right there in that town, there is a man of God who is highly respected, and Saul has never heard of him. What would you think of somebody who said, you know, I've never heard of Aaron Rodgers? You'd be like, man, you don't know anything about football, do you? Well, this guy is the spiritual celebrity figure of the town, and even the servant knows about him, but Saul doesn't know about him. There's another clue that spirituality is not high on his list of priorities. Verse 7, Saul said to his servant, if we go, what can we give the man? The food in our sacks is gone. We have no gift to take to the man of God. What do we have? The servant said, look, I have a quarter of a shekel of silver. I'll give it to the man of God so he'll tell us what way to take. Verse 9, formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, come, let's go to the seer, because the prophet of today used to be called a seer. And even today, a prophet and a seer, we kind of look at that as the same thing. Verse 10, good, Saul said to his servant, come, let's go. So they set out for the town where the man of God was. As they were going up the hill to the town, they met some young women coming out to draw water, and they asked them, is the seer here? He is, they answered. He's ahead of you. Hurry now. He's just come to our town today, for the people have a sacrifice at the high place. As soon as you enter the town, you will find him before he goes up to the high place to eat. The people will not begin eating until he comes, because he must bless the sacrifice. Then those invited will eat. Go up now, you should find him about this time. They went up to the town. As they were entering it, there was Samuel coming toward them on his way up to the high place. Verse 15, now the day before Saul came, the Lord had revealed this to Samuel. About this time tomorrow, I will send you a man from the land of Benjamin. Anoint him ruler over my people Israel. He will deliver them from the hand of the Philistines. I have looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. Now, this is so interesting on many different levels. On one level, it's interesting because the Lord has spoken to Samuel about Saul, but the Lord has not spoken to Saul about Samuel other than his servant saying, there's a seer in this town. So right off the bat, and maybe this is no surprise, but Samuel does seem to have a much more closer relationship with God than Saul does, That might be another narrative hint. Another interesting thing about this is he was told to anoint Saul ruler over my people Israel. I've looked on my people, for their cry has reached me. And that usually is a sign of compassion. Like in Egypt, when the Israelites' cry reached up to heaven and God looked down and had compassion on them, the end of Exodus chapter 2. But in this particular instance, it says their cry has reached me, but, God is answering it by giving them what they want so that they can see through their life experiences that what they want isn't necessarily what they ought to want. We got to learn that sometimes. Sometimes God, to teach us a lesson, gives us what we want so that we'll find out we were dumb for wanting it. It does happen. Verse 17, when Samuel caught sight of Saul, the Lord said to him, this is the man I spoke to you about. Man, how would you like it? God speaking to you like that so clearly. Hey, that's the guy over there. You know what? You can have that if you know the scripture. If you are fluent in the scriptures, God is speaking to you all the time. Whether or not we always listen to God is another matter entirely. And, and I've had my moments too where I'm not always listening to what God says. And like, for example, I know I'm supposed to act like a Christian when I'm talking on the phone with a telemarketer that's trying to sell me something when I'm trying to cancel the very thing they're trying to sell me. And, there are times there where I'm not ready to act as Christian as I should. You know what I mean? And I think here the people are, God's got to give them what they want so that they can realize, hey, we should be listening to what God says is best, and ask for the king that God would choose over us next time around. But here we go. Verse 18, Saul approached Samuel in the gateway and said, will you please tell me where the seer's house is? That's kind of like Luke Skywalker saying to Yoda, take me to the Jedi Master, not realizing yet that Yoda is the Jedi Master. Same thing here. Samuel says, I am the seer. Go up ahead of me to the high place, for today you're to eat with me, and in the morning I will send you on your way and will tell you all that is in your heart. As for the donkeys you lost 3 days ago, don't worry about them. They have been found. And to whom is all the desire of Israel turned, if not to you and your whole family line? Now, whether or not the desire of Israel should have been turned to him or to a king like him, well, of course, that's another discussion. But that is the case. And verse 21, Saul is still pretty humble at this early. He might not be a spiritual person. He might not know about the man of God. He might not have any spiritual discernment or wisdom, but he's still brought up in humble surroundings. And so in verse 21, he says, but am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans? Except for his father Kish. Why do you say such a thing to me? So it's kind of refreshing to see Saul be so humble, because he's going to build a monument to his honor, in chapter 13, and he's going to become so full of himself, it's just unbelievable. But here in these early days, at least he's humble, even if he's not spiritual. Verse 22, then Samuel brought Saul and his servant into the hall and seated them at the head of those who were invited, about 30 in number. Samuel said, bring me the piece of meat I gave you, the one I told you to lay aside. So the cook took up the thigh. Now, I got to tell you this right now. I like the breast and the wing better than the thigh. I like the white meat better than the dark meat. But, they were going for the thigh, so all right. With what was on it and set it in front of Saul. Samuel said, here is what has been kept for you. Eat, because it was set aside for you for this occasion from the time I said I have invited guests. And Saul dined with Samuel that day. That must have been kind of a fish out of water experience, because Saul's probably used to hanging out with other Benjamites and other people who may or may not be so spiritual. And here he is hanging out with a spiritual giant. And he must have been a little out of his depth here. Verse 25, after they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul on the roof of his house. And I've always wondered, what did they talk about up there? And I can assure you, they probably didn't just talk about the weather. I'm sure Samuel was saying things like, you know what? This is your chance to be good. This is your chance to rise to the occasion to which God has called you. The kingship is going to be like something that Israel has never seen before. And you are God's man to lead the people toward a closer relationship with him and to a mightier presence in the world. I can picture Samuel saying something like that to Saul. It's been said that when Queen Victoria, when she first became queen, when she was like 11 years old, she was given a list of all the kings and queens who were before her. And she saw all the famous leaders. And then at the very bottom of the list, she saw her name. And she started crying, because at that moment she realized the regalness of the responsibility, the royal calling that she had. And then she looked up at the person who was sharing that with her, and she said, I will be good. And she was. And we need to pray that our leaders will have that same desire. And perhaps Samuel was calling on Saul to say, you should have that desire to be good for God and to be good for the people. Verse 25, after they came down from the high place to the town, Samuel talked with Saul. Oh, we read that. They rose about daybreak, and Samuel called to Saul, get ready, I'll send you on your way. When Saul got ready, he and Samuel went outside together. As they were going down to the edge of the town, Samuel said to Saul, tell the servant to go on ahead of us. And the servant did so, but you stay here for a while so that I may give you a message from God. And that's where our reading leaves off today, right at the moment that Samuel is going to give Saul the message from God about being king. But again, this is one of those readings where it's like Israel has judged the kind of king they wanted based on how he looks. He's good looking, he's big, he's buff, he's burly, he's powerful. But what's he like on the inside? They didn't care about that because they didn't care about that for themselves. They weren't trying to be close to the Lord. They only cried out to God when they were in political or military trouble. And that's why they weren't interested in spiritual things. But as Christians, we need to know that there's nothing more important than our relationship with God and the way we treat other people. And, God's still teaching me, like he did with that telemarketer who's trying to get me to buy. Anyways. So we need God's help every single day with that. And God help us to bring friends into our lives too, who know the Lord and love God and are people of character and not just people who are popular or look good on the outside. And we should be praying for leaders like that, not be looking for like the typical, prototypical American president, lean and in shape and smiling and kissing babies and that type of thing. We should looking for somebody with the skill and the will and the character to be able to do the job. But anyways, Jesus loves you. This I know, for the Bible tells me so. You have a happy day after Easter. I can't believe it's snowing out there. I bet you we got at least 2 inches of puffy white snow on the grass. I'm glad it's not sticking on the ground, so that the roads should be okay. But it's April 18th. What's going on around here? Anyways, you guys have a great day, and God bless.